Hi, and welcome to Love Your Job, Love Your Life podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Chris Wimshurst. Welcome, Chris.
Hi James, how are we doing?
Very well. So, very quick introduction. Chris is a entrepreneur. He's got multiple businesses that he manages and runs. But I suppose actually, if I was to classify Chris and what he does and his expertise, um, he's done a lot of work around psychology. So he's a business psychologist. And what he does with that is he helps organizations and he helps people to understand how they can get the best out of themselves. And that's through multiple different ways. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of that, Chris, as we go through today. But clearly, one of the biggest ways you do it, and we've been talking about it just this morning, is through coaching and helping organizations develop their people to the best of their ability. So we're going to have a really interesting conversation today, Chris. I hope we are. We've had lots of conversations over the last kind of few months around personas and around how people show up to work, and how actually that can affect people in a multitude of different ways. So we're going to talk about that today. It's slightly different from the norm, but it will be an interesting conversation. So Chris, let's start off with a very broad question to kind of get things flowing. Um, why is it we talked about personas, and I've talked about masks before? People show up to work with their mask on, they put their work mask on, then they go home and they put their family mask on, etc. But you talk about it from a persona perspective. Why do you think people have personas at work, and why do you think they show up with these personas?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to it's rooted in psychology. And for me, it's around a multitude of factors, but one of them is around acceptance. So, you want to be liked, you want to be seen to be successful, and therefore you almost can adopt a persona or a way of thinking or a way of being to try to fit in with the natural environment that's around you. So I think that's one aspect, and I think that there's pride that's associated with persona as well, where you want to achieve within life, you want to be able to achieve goals, earn money, be respected, and actually, so within all of that, there's a lot of this deep-seated kind of programming which enables you to want to be part of the gang and to have this drive within you that takes you into an environment where you will hopefully succeed within your life, within
Yeah,
within your work, and I think that's right and it's proper, and you learn a way of being. But sometimes I think that when we are in that work environment, there's this concept of authenticity comes up. Um, and so what can sometimes happen is that in the need for acceptance, people can create perhaps a persona that isn't their true self. And that can then create a degree of friction, I think, within the individual, which is that, well, who really am I? And I think then you get to the more of the deeper questions about what you believe in, what your morals are, what your values are, what your drivers are, and so it can be quite a nuanced subject.
yeah. And I guess I've seen it all the time, and I'll be brutally honest. I've done it. I've showed up to work and I put my work mask on, and whether that be in my early career where I was striving to be maybe something bigger, as you talked about. I wanted to progress. I wanted to earn more money. I wanted to be noticed. So you try and pretend to be someone you're not, or actually later on in my life and in my career, I put a work mask on to hide, and we'll talk about this later. But I put it on to hide what was truly going on
Mm,
inside,
yeah.
and that for me was what was my darkest mental health moments, if you like, which was, you put it on and nobody at work would know what was going on actually inside me. And that's kind of, I suppose, why people do it, to hide away from their, as you say, their true authentic self. So when you think about that, Chris, how does that, I suppose, how does that impact organizations, or how does that impact teams? And again, we were talking this morning or this week around the work you're doing with sales teams. How does that persona, people showing up with this persona, affect kind of sales teams or business in general?
Yeah, I think that when you're looking to effectively go into a place of work, you're trying to do the best that you can, and you're trying to understand how best to navigate the landscape. And particularly if you work within, say, a sales environment, you are not only navigating your internal landscape, but you're also trying to build rapport, build relationships, develop customers. And I think that if you're maybe there's a lack of understanding about who you really are and what your own kind of core strengths are, then you're going to be almost like trying to fit in or trying to build these relationships, and then you're not going to come across as authentic, and therefore that's maybe going to then impact your ability to create that kind of level of emotional connection, whether it's from an internal or an external perspective. I've been doing a lot of work in the last few weeks and months around this concept of emotional intelligence. And it is a fascinating topic because I think traditionally, when we talk about emotional intelligence, or EQ, as it's sometimes known, is that it used to be felt that you either had emotional intelligence or you didn't. You're able to create those social connections, or you can't, and you're more of an introvert. But it's a really growing field of psychology, and the with the advances in neuroscience and brain scans, they've been able to really see that actually through the term of what's called neuroplasticity, which is around flexibility of the mind, emotional intelligence is something that can be grown, it can be evolved, it can be adapted. And therefore, I've been talking a lot around this concept of how if you have the first step around emotional intelligence is around emotional awareness. So how do I feel? How am I coming across to other people? What is my own self-perception? What's people's perceptions of me? And it's around that awareness. And sometimes people are not really aware of their own emotions or of others. They can't read the room, or they're not aware of their own internal state. And therefore, when we talk about the 5 components of emotional intelligence, or EQ, I've been looking at the model from a guy called Daniel Goleman, who's like the goat of emotional intelligence. He wrote a book in 1995 called Emotional Intelligence, and he's a Harvard lecturer. And he talks about the 5 components of EQ, but the first one is around self-awareness. So around how are you aware of your own feelings and your own emotions, the ability to read the emotions of others. And that's the basic tenet of EQ. And if you're able to effectively develop that emotional awareness, then I think that then links back to your identity and who you are and how am I feeling, and being able to interact and navigate the landscape that we've talked about. So that's the first component. But then the second is called emotional reactivity. And actually your ability to self-regulate your emotions. And I find that that's the big bit that I think there's a massive gap within the corporate world, within individuals, is that individuals don't necessarily have the toolkit to understand how to manage their emotions. And sometimes their emotions can almost dictate to them, and therefore you can lead to stress, jealousy, anger, depression, anxiety, whatever it might be. And I think that, so when we're looking at potentially like where I think the corporate world is at the moment around this concept of, let's say, mental health or stress, is that I feel it's very reactive. And I feel that sometimes organizations will pay lip service to the fact that they are a supportive organization, but in reality what typically happens is they'll have the employee assist program, or EAP, which they'll set up, which are great, and and they potentially get 6 free counseling sessions, and I think that's a good offering that you have from an employee engagement and supportive perspective. But my argument is, if it's got to the point that they need counseling, then actually it's almost after the horse has bolted, and what could have been done to prevent them getting into that place. And actually on the flip side of that, how do you create a culture of resilience and of positive mindset and of a growth mindset. And so what I've been doing with my excuse me, my business Phoenix 51 is we've put together a program of training and coaching, which is designed to effectively help organizations like tackle this stuff head on, get ahead of the curve, and promote a culture of mindset and resilience, which therefore leads to, a greater balance within their staff. It leads to increased productivity, less absenteeism, less presenteeism, all of those things. And so, yeah, we're kind of bringing that subject to the fore rather than just putting it in this like HR based box. We're saying, oh yeah, we've got some counselling sessions that we can offer to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's trying to
Yeah, it does.
flip the script a little bit.
It makes perfect sense. And it kind of, when I think about it from my business perspective and my engage to succeed model, it's when people drop onto a roller coaster ride and which is exactly that. It's that self-awareness piece, but it's also that regulation piece as you're talking about. And it's creating that environment where it's okay to say, I'm on a roller coaster and this is the reason why. And very often I see that it can be something that people aren't having the time to do outside of work. Love your job, love your life, love your life, love your job, whichever way round you want to put it. It's the same. We know that if you're doing the things outside of work you love, that almost is helping you to regulate that nervous system, and it's helping you to actually become probably better at work. But what we tend to do in the UK and around the world is we tend to sacrifice ourselves for others, as I always talk about.
Yeah.
So that classic scenario of you get a phone call from your boss at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he says, "Oh, I've got a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Can you just pull this together for me?" And you're like, "Well, that's going to take me 2 hours, and I've got we were talking about running and going to the gym just before this started. And I've got a class at 5:30. Oh, but it's my boss, so I'll sacrifice my class to do the work." Well, the impact of that, psychologically, the impact of that is it's a negative impact, right? Because you're sacrificing something, you're not doing your exercise, which is making that that for me is the regulation piece.
Yeah. I think it speaks to a broader piece around this kind of internal versus external validation. And I think that we've been kind of, I guess, conditioned or programmed to believe that effectively happiness will be achieved through external factors. So whether it's the job promotion, the pay rise, the car, the house. And I do a lot of work with business owners, and sometimes when I'm coaching them, they'll almost get to a new milestone within their business. And then they think that when they've hit that milestone, suddenly it's like, oh, I'm just going to feel amazing. And then they hit this new milestone and they feel flat. And it's like, well, let's explore that. Let's drive into that a little bit. And I think that almost you're on that kind of constant striving mindset where you're almost always thinking about the next goal, the next goal, the next goal. And actually what they haven't potentially done is some of the inner work to actually find that contentment and peace within themselves. And that's some of the stuff that I do with individuals and with businesses, is to understand what drives that inner happiness, that inner contentment. And when you get that bit right, then business can flourish, because you've got this healthy mindset, this concept of what is deemed a brain body contract, where effectively if you're working on your body, that's going to help your mind, that's going to help your state, it's going to help your energy, and that's then going to flow out of you, rather than thinking that happiness is going to come from whatever external factor that you've said that that's going to bring you happiness.
Yeah. It's so true. Like we both come from a background of recruitment. How many and I still remember the same conversations 20 years ago that I was having with not that I'm in recruitment nowadays, but the classic of being bought back by a company. Someone gets a new job, they get a pay rise, then the company they're working for says, "Oh, well, we'll give you an even bigger pay rise if you stay." And then they stay, but I can't remember the percentages, but I reckon it's probably 75-80% of people that took that pay rise 6 months later are back on the market
they'll go
looking
anyway.
for another job.
Yeah, 100%.
They'll go anyway.
Yeah.
Because it's a short-term fix almost. It's a short-term hit that says, "Oh, I've got more money. I'm going to be happier." but it doesn't always it's not always the case. So yeah, interesting. Um, so look, we could probably talk about the how this is affecting people and the business for hours on end. But what I'm really interested, Chris, here is, there is so much talk around. You've touched on it: mental health, depression, burnout is another one which is happening all over the place. And we talk about men's mental health, and I know we're both big advocates of supporting men that are struggling. But more and more people I talk to, it's not just men that are struggling; it's everybody is struggling. Um, and so with the work that you're doing around helping organizations, helping individuals, what are some of the key things that people can do, or we can start helping people to improve their lives or improve their jobs or whatever? What are some of the things that you're coming across that seem to be working well in organizations or with individual clients you're working with?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about with my personal well-being coaching business is called Bearwolf. Is we talk about a toolkit, and effectively it's step by step different process and modalities that you can do to effectively enhance your way of life, your well-being, your mindset, your fitness. But I think before you can even get into that, you've got to talk about being able to actually give yourself permission to look after yourself first. And the key theme I see with all of my coaching, I do what's called a life audit. So I'll go through and I'll literally map out and get the individual to map out the different component parts of their life, whether it's through work, their relationships, their family, their children, and then their relationship to themselves in terms of how they prioritize their own well-being. And the biggest thing that I see is that people do not prioritize themselves. They put themselves last because they've got the deadline to meet, or they've got the kids club that they've got to do, or they're worrying about money or whatever it might be, all these different component parts and pressures. These make up what is your life, but actually the bit that gets neglected is the most important bit. It's what I call the base of the pyramid.
Right.
You are the
Yeah.
base of that pyramid. You are holding up everything else in your life, and that's bearing down on you. And so I ask the question to my coaching clients is that, if you are the base of that pyramid, is that built on stable foundations, or are there cracks in there? And 9 times out of 10, there's some cracks. No one's perfect,
Yeah.
right? But I think it's that bit around giving yourself permission to put yourself first. Because there's a psychological hurdle that we need to get over first, which is saying, no, this is more important than anything, actually. And I
Yeah.
can be a better employee, a better business owner, a better husband or wife, a better father if I put myself first. And it's actually, and it feels like we've got it the wrong way around. So I think that's the first bit. And then the second bit
Yeah.
is then building in the habits over time. And I think one of the two of the biggest things for me is the ability to move and the ability to get out in nature. And it sounds a bit overly simplistic, but actually the scientific data is absolutely clear. The concept of walking. They've said that if you could put the physiological and psychological benefits of walking into a pill, it would be the greatest selling pharmaceutical drug ever created. But people do not see that. They just, it's just going for a walk, but it's so much more than that. So I think that like steady state cardio, the ability to allow your mind to breathe, the ability to get away from a screen, and that is one of the fundamentals that we talk about. And then like overlaying that with high intensity exercise is so important. So if you can do or work your way up to doing 3 sessions of intensive cardio 3 times a week, so you're only talking 90 minutes per week, that can make a massive difference in terms of your overall physiological state, your heart health, but also then your mental health as well. And then some of your basics around diet, cutting out ultra processed foods, not always getting Just Eat, or getting the cheeky KFC when time is against you. So again, it sounds like nothing about this is new under the sun, right? It's what I consider the basics or the fundamentals, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not being done.
No, no, no.
And therefore, that's part of the toolkit. So low intensity exercise, high intensity exercise, your diet, but the big one which we've been really promoting with both my Phoenix business and also with Bearwolf is breathwork.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and be happy to talk a little bit more about that if you think that would be interesting for the audience.
yeah, yeah. And we'll come on to that in a second because it's actually while you've been talking, I've been reflecting, and I reflect back. Not I don't often like talking about the COVID period because I think lots of people have sort of done it and trying to move on from it. But when you look at the COVID period, um, people were people weirdly were probably more active then than they are now. So when we went into lockdown and you couldn't do anything, I have never seen so many people out walking and being out on their own, with their families, because there was this natural instinct that, you know, we're not supposed to go out of our house, but it's a bit like prison, wasn't it? When you reflect back on it, you're not allowed out your house unless you're in your bubble and you're allowed out the house for an hour a day. So people were actually going out their house for an hour a day. They were doing their 10,000 steps. They were doing they were being outside in the fresh air. They were getting their sunlight. They were getting their vitamin D. They were all these things that we know improve our health. We were doing, or more people were doing it. As soon as that stopped, people over the course of let's say the last 4 years, we're slowly, in my view, we're slowly going back to what it was like before. People aren't going out. People are stuck behind their desk. I was talking to my wife about it when we were out walking the dog. The dog helps, actually, gets us out. But how many people sit in behind a computer at a desk in their house for 8 or 9 hours a day, and they don't move? And this is the corporate life, and I think this is where for me, businesses actually, going back to what you said about lip service, businesses need to actually start thinking about, how do we address this?
Yeah.
How do we encourage people to move? How do we encourage people to stop and invest in themselves, rather than, when I was at Capita, team call after 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 team call. That was my day. And invariably used to get I had to put time in my diary to have a break.
Yeah.
Otherwise I'd be on calls all day.
Yeah.
But this is almost like this for me is where organizations probably need to stop and think about, how do we change this what is becoming almost, it's not a culture, but it is a culture.
I think it
You know what I
is.
mean?
And yeah, the COVID thing's really interesting for me because that resonates a lot on a personal and a professional level. In a professional sense, so I was doing my master's in business psychology during COVID, and so I had an opportunity to actually do my dissertation on a subject that was happening in the real world. So I did it as a study on the shift from office working to home working as a measurement around subjective well-being. And what was interesting about what came out of that is that even though individuals potentially had more time because they were commuting less, they weren't taking that time. They were actually at their desk for longer because they were maybe fearful about losing their job or getting furloughed. So actually, what happened within COVID, within the organization that I worked with, was that productivity went up, but well-being went down. And the phrase that came through, this cultural phrase, was back to back. I'm back to back. And it almost became like, I don't know, either a source of pride. Oh, look how busy I am, or justifying how busy I am. Oh, I'm back to back. I'm so busy at the moment. You wouldn't want to furlough me. Do you know what I mean? So, and I think there's still that that's still, we've got a hangover from that, this back-to-back culture. And so I worked with a couple of organizations, and one of them was like we created a walking club at lunchtime for those that are back in the
Yeah.
office, and that worked really well. So
Yeah.
people are getting out and going out. And then the other thing was around mandating. So there's actually a block that was put in a whole company's diary between 12:30 and 1:30 every day.
Wow.
And the idea is you almost had to justify putting a meeting over that lunch break, because that was almost like a mandate, which I thought was quite clever.
Yeah.
And then the final thing that I've seen and recommended to organizations is putting in a 45-minute or 15-minute virtual meeting policy. So rather than it being 30 and 60,
And 60.
the idea is that you do a 45-minute, and then you've got time to get up, get away from your desk, make a tea, make a coffee before you then go back in. So it's these little tweaks and changes I think that actually can make a big difference, because it shows that the organization is prioritizing the health and well-being of their organizations, and actually it has a positive knock-on effect in productivity, because you're not getting to the end of your day and effectively you're suffering that burnout because you've just been looking at a screen for 9 hours. So
Yeah. And if nothing else, a 15-minute break between meetings gives you a chance to step away, but also to prepare for the next one. Because invariably, you go from one meeting to another, and they're completely different meetings. You're talking about completely different things, and actually, it probably takes 5-10 minutes for your brain to actually wire into what you're now talking about.
yeah, and if you've got actions off the back of it, you've got a gigantic to-do list at 5 o'clock, which you've got no idea where to start on. So
yeah. No, I know some organisations have mandated that 45-minute meeting, and it works really well. So there's something for people to think about that might be struggling. Put 45 minutes in rather than an hour. So let's go back to the breathwork piece, because this is something that is close to my heart as well. And it kind of links back to that regulation piece, doesn't it? It's for me, I started meditating and started doing breath work probably about 6 months ago now, and it's transformed my life to a degree. It's really calmed me down. So I know you're qualified breathwork coach as well, Chris. You've got lots of strings to your bow, haven't you? You're a coach, you're a breathwork, your mental health, your psychology. But the breath work is something that is becoming more popular, and I think actually corporates as well are starting to open up to this. That says, actually, can we bring this into the organisation, and can we bring expertise into organisations? So I don't throw it back to you. Yes, let's talk about breath work. Over to you. I didn't know what you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think that it's still quite a new concept for people, and that and it has entered into the zeitgeist, into the kind of the popular lexicon. You've got a guy called Stuart Sanderson, who's now the breathwork coach for the England football team. There was in the program Billions, if you remember, like Bobby Axelrod, he used to do breathwork as well. You've got Wim Hof, who's now been on the BBC. So I think there's a lot more awareness. It's becoming a lot more mainstream, but I think there's still this barrier that we need to come. It's still considered a bit hippie or a bit woo. And interestingly, breathwork used to be known as breathwork meditation, but they deliberately dropped the meditation aspect of it because of those connotations, but because also it's backed in hard science. And I've been on this journey myself. I started doing breathwork in 2021. So I've been doing it for 4 years. And, like you, I struggled during COVID. I felt I was a bit of isolation, working from home, fear of the world ending, all that type of stuff. And it was through nature, so getting out into nature that really helped turn my mental and physical health around. But it was also my breathwork journey. And I think that when we talk about emotional reactivity or emotional regulation, breathwork gives you that ability to be able to calm the nervous system and to be more aware of what your triggers are, or actually your internal state. And it gives you that ongoing sense of calm. But if you practice it over time, it physically rewires your brain. And I challenged, I delivered this in organization Reach PLC. Huge organization, work in the media space. I was down in their head office down in Canary Wharf. And I deliberately was a bit provocative. I said to them, if you could take a pill which basically made you happier, more productive, more empathetic, more energized, less anxious, less stressed, and it had no downside to it, would you take that pill? And after a little bit of debate, they were like, yeah, I probably would. And I said, right, so if you could do a practice for 10 minutes a day that gave you all those benefits, would you do it? And there's a few smiles in the room, because I think that the challenge is that you've got to commit to it. And and
Yeah, you
and
do.
my little cheesy tagline around it is, it's 10 minutes a day to change your life. And it is that powerful, but it almost seems too good to be true. So I think there is a few skeptics out there, but the science is there. Again, the same guy who wrote the emotional intelligence book, Daniel Goleman, he's written another book called Altered Traits, which is all the latest science around breathwork and meditation, and how effectively it can have an amazingly positive impact on your lives. So yeah, so I do, I practice it myself every day. I take people out into nature and do retreats, and I get them to do some more of like the deep transformative breath work. But also, I'm trying to bring it into the boardroom as well. I'm trying to bring it into organizations where it's just raising awareness of it as a modality, and trying to get people to try it, and then seeing how it
Yeah,
impacts, their overall wellness.
yeah, yeah. And when you try it for the first time, you're like, wow. Well, I was anyway. How can breathing? We breathe all day, every day, and yet we don't breathe properly. And society has changed over the years. Has changed the way they breathe. And so breath work really does have a huge impact. And as you say, I do the same thing. I always do 10 minutes of breath work and then go into my meditation every morning. And it's I used to be quite hot headed, I'll be honest, and used to lose my rag quite quickly.
Yeah.
And now I'm much calmer, and I'm much calmer with. Even my kids have said to me, and they're a bit older now, but even my kids have said to me that, Dad, you don't shout anymore. And I'm like, I can do if you want me to. And they're like, no, 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 don't want it.
Yeah.
But it's I put it all down to regulating my nervous system and being able to, when I can feel, as I used to say, you can feel the blood boil, can't you, when you're getting angry or anxious or whatever. And actually, when I start feeling it. That's when I step back and I just breathe, and it just helps it go down again. So it's fascinating.
Yes,
And
exactly those two things. So emotional awareness and emotional reactivity,
yeah,
and actually being
yeah,
able to have I guess, the toolkit to be able to just calm everything down and not react in the moment. And yes,
yeah,
that's great to hear.
yeah, yeah. And I think this comes back to the point you made earlier, Chris, where you said, and again, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but there's lip service. Organizations are very good at saying, we've got the EAP service, if you like. We've got mental health trained first aiders. We've got these benefits. We've got training. We've got all of these things. But what they're not doing, in my view, and this is probably quite controversial, but what they're not doing is they're not actually providing this practical stuff that will make a difference to
Yeah.
their employees.
100%. So, like, it's great that organizations have mental health first aiders, but primarily mental health first aiders is a signposting service. So
Yeah,
it is saying, like, okay, we recognize you are having this. This is, the options that you have. These are the people that you could speak to. So it's important that they're there from a supportive capacity, but again, it's reactive, it's not proactive. And I
yeah,
think that's the shift I feel needs to happen, is that this stuff needs to be
yeah,
much more at the forefront, I think, of actually of organizations' business strategy, because it becomes, rather than talking about it as a thing which is like, oh, we're supporting our staff, it can actually be a competitive advantage for having a happy, healthy
yeah, yeah,
workforce, because you've
yeah,
got these
totally.
people that are going to be happy, they're in themselves, they've got energy, they've got creative ideas, they're not operating from a place of fear, they're operating from a place of abundance and confidence. And that, I don't think that narrative has landed yet. And that's one of the things that I'm really, really passionate about.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love it, and it's similar to what I talk about with my clients as well. That you talk about and I agree with you. I'm very much an advocate of get outdoors and fitness, as you know. But lots of people that I've coached, actually, there's lots of people in the corporate world that aren't into fitness, and you're probably going to struggle to get them into fitness. But they have something else that they love to do, And that could be reading a book, that could be sitting in silence, that could be, there was one person that I worked with who loved knitting. And so it's about finding that thing that people love to do, that actually, again, it's that regulation bit. One client I worked with, they were struggling with the new, as I call it, the 1 second commute. You put your laptop down, you step out of your office, and you're straight into your family world. And the kids come running up to you and go, "Oh, Dad, Dad, Dad." And you're like, "Whoa, I haven't got that half an hour commute I had on the train to read a book is no longer there." And I said, "Well, finish your day and sit in your office for half an hour reading a book." And he went, "Oh, love that." And he tried it, and it completely and utterly transformed that the movement between
It's the
work and
transition.
home.
Yeah.
It's that transition. It's that, again, it's regulation, isn't it? It's that, what's the decompression that I have to do before I put myself back in that environment?
Yeah. Otherwise, you're straight from the frying pan into the fire, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. So look, Chris, we've been talking. We could probably talk for hours. Well, we do talk for hours, so we know we can talk for hours. There's one other thing though that I just wanted you to maybe share. So you talked very much around Phoenix 51 as the business that you work with organizations and you coaching and all that great stuff, and the apprenticeships and how you recruit, and there's loads of stuff there. So if you're interested in any of that, speak to Chris about that. You've talked about Bearwolf, which is your sort of your retreats. You're helping people from a personal level. The final thing that we haven't really touched on, which I said we're both advocates of men's mental health. Men's mental health isn't improving. It's probably static, but it's been static for years. We've got Mental Health Week coming up, and then Men's Mental Health Week coming up. But you've also got a men's mental health charity, I believe. Do you want to quickly just share what you're doing in that space to sort of close off the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so we created a charity in 2023 called it's called Walk and Talk for Mental Health, and it's a men's charity based for we advocate for men within Leighton Buzzard in Bedfordshire and surrounding areas. So we kind of cover like the Aylesbury, Berkhamsted, maybe down to St Albans, that kind of like that corridor within the three counties. And ultimately, we set it up because we felt that men didn't have a vessel, if you like, or an arena to be able to actually talk about their feelings just with other blokes. Typically, you'll find that when blokes get together is down the pub, and that's not always like the healthiest of avenues for to talk about it, and often it won't be quite surface level. So we're not a group therapy like organization. We effectively provide that community-based support for men to come and talk and just share their experiences. They can talk about their mental health, or they can just talk about their week. It's just a really nice natural environment for like-minded blokes to come along and effectively just have a chat, and as it does what it says on the tin, have a walk and have a talk. So we do 2 walks a month, and we've got like a number of different guided walks that we do in our local area. And we also do talk and talk. So the first Monday of every month, we get together at the local football club, and someone will come and talk and share their personal journey about mental health. It's kind of a talking circle. But we've had breath work, we've had yoga, we've had guided meditation, we've had all these different things that we put on for our members, and it's going really well. We've got like 90 members now, and we've got funding that's coming in, and it's really growing. And it's one of those things where, like Kevin Costner, like if you build it, they will come. We had an idea, we didn't know if it would work, and it's really, really resonated. So I think hopefully that's an example of some positive stuff that it's promoting that narrative around men and about that it's good to talk. Like we all suffer from mental health issues or periods of high or low mood, at some point during our life, and actually it's really important that men feel that they can open up and they can talk about it. I guess that's my kind of my call to arms for men. And I know
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
doing some great work in this space as well, James, and
yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's
No,
brilliant.
it is, and it's much needed. And the walking part of it is not necessarily something I've done. I've done with other men and with friends, etc. But the walking bit is really powerful because, and it's a psychological thing as well, that when you're walking next to somebody, you're almost not sitting opposite them, staring them in their eye and struggling to talk and open up. It's much easier to open up and talk when you're walking next to somebody. You can kind of glance across at them and stuff like that, but you're not in direct eye contact, which again, psychologically makes it easier for people to open up and talk. So,
Very much.
huge, well done on that, Chris. And, it's much needed out there. So something, if anyone is watching and they're in the local area, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire area, then certainly get in touch with Chris. So, Chris, closing this down, this has been really interesting. We've gone all over the place. I knew we would, but we've had an interesting conversation. Final point, and clearly I will put contact details and everything in the comments so people can get hold of you. But is there a best way to get hold of you if anyone is interested in any one of these three things that you do?
Yeah, so Phoenix 51 is simply phoenix51.io on our website. So that's everything corporate, people, business transformation, anything within that people sphere, whether it's training, coaching. We also have a big focus on sales, performance and sales coaching as well, and recruitment. And then Bearwolf Instagram is the best way to get hold of me. So that's Bearwolf_coaching. So I share a lot of my journey within that, my exercise, my ice baths I do, my breath work, my retreats. That's all out there. So that's a bit more interactive, that one.
Yeah.
And then walk and talk. Again, my walk and talk page is on my LinkedIn, but that's walk and talk. .org.uk, and then that's got all of our details about our events that we run as well. So
Perfect. Well, look, I'll drop all of those links into the comments or into the section. So if anyone's watching this and wants to get hold of Chris, that's the best way to do it. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've probably gone over the time that we said we would, but it's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you ever so much for joining me, and no doubt we will continue our conversations offline around all of this stuff. And maybe there's some collaboration there from a men's mental health perspective. So thanks for joining me, Chris.
thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it.
No problem.